Hello, my loves. It feels like I say this every single time it comes to like wrap up time of the month, but it feels like it's been ages since I've sat down and just talked to you guys about what I've been reading recently. Last month, as in October, was an absolute flop when it came to reading. Like, I couldn't get into anything. Everything I picked up I couldn't concentrate on, or I realized I wasn't in the mood for. There were quite a few things that I DNF'd because I just wasn't enjoying them. So I really hardly read anything, and I was very, very much determined to make November different because I was just missing it. I was missing having a good book. And do you know what? For the most part, November has been wonderful in terms of reading. It's been fabulous. I found some new favorites, which is really exciting. Very, very much looking forward to talking to you guys about those. There's also a few in here that are just kind of meh in my opinion, but you know, it's impossible to have a month full of entirely really, really good reads, so I think it's been successful and I'm really looking forward to talking about all of these books. We're mostly gonna be talking about fantasy and some classics. There's a few that don't really fit into either of those, but we're mostly talking fantasy and classics today. So if that's your kind of thing, get a drink, stick around, let's talk about some books. As always, I would love to know what you've been reading recently. Things you've loved, things you've hated. Please let me know and discuss together, because that is one of the best things about books, is talking about them with other people. So yeah, let me know your favorites of November. Okay, we're gonna start with classics. There's technically only 2 books. Technically, we'll get to what I mean in a minute when we come to the second one. But the first one is Demian by Herman Hesse. I think because it had been last month, a month of things being quite slow, me not getting into things, this is pretty short, so I figured it would be a good thing to start the month with, because even if I wasn't fully into it, it wasn't going to take up too much of my time and it might just kickstart the reading again. I did actually end up enjoying this more than I maybe thought I would when I started this. I ended up settling on about 4 stars. I'm not 100% sure on that. I think it's somewhere maybe between 3.5 and 4. But 4 felt comfortable, so that's what we settled on. This, I have realised, is one of my favourite genre of classics. It is the kind of coming of age, starting with someone in childhood and going all the way up to their adulthood, and looking at them developing not just their personality, but their like ideals and morals and all of that as well. They are, I think, some of my favourites. This is the shortest one I've ever read though, because usually they are much longer. And even though it was shorter, it didn't really feel like you missed out on that. It still felt like you went through all of these years of our main character Emil's life, mainly focusing on his conflicting feelings towards like the light, which was his home life, which was almost like an idealized fantasy feeling, happy, perfect, morally good family that was very much grounded and based in religious ideals of what is good, versus then the dark or evil, which was mainly influenced by a couple of different people in his life, the main one being Demian, and looking at basically, yeah, Emil experiencing guilt throughout his childhood for not really sticking to that world of the light, and then as he gets older, like rebelling more and basically just trying to work out who he is, what he believes. Not really that much happens, to be honest, in terms of plot. I find it particularly interesting to look at the like ideals of good versus bad in like older books like this. The ideals of like good and evil or good and bad back then is so different to how we would see it now, mainly because it's always very steeped in religious ideals, usually Christian ideals of what is good or bad based on whatever prominent Christian denomination was there at the time. I think sometimes, like, for me anyway, I can look back and be like, this is ridiculous that you're stressing yourself out over how bad this is, and it's fine. But I think it's just an interesting insight back into that and how different things were, and how like how much changed our as a society, like not even in a bad way, but just how changed our morals have been, and how much less influenced as a whole we are by religion. Very, very interesting. I would like to read more by Hesse after reading this. I found the writing very, very easy to read, incredibly easy to read, and there were parts of it that were like, made me think, or quite deep. There were also parts of it that I was just like, that's a bit weird. There's like a whole thing where the main character, Emil, like really obviously fancies Demian, his best friend's mum, and that the whole thing was just maybe a bit weird. But anyway, this was a good start to the month. It wasn't groundbreaking. I've thought about it occasionally from time to time since. It was enjoyable and a decent start to the month. It got me back into like the swing of things with reading, so that's always good. And then the next classic, that's what we say it's technically 2 books. This I don't have a physical copy of. This is Poor Folk and Other Stories by Dostoevsky. This is a collection of it has Poor Folk in it, which is like a shorter novel. It's not like his full-length novels, which are massive. I think it was maybe half the size of this book, so it was maybe like 100 and something pages, I can't remember. And then it's also got 3 short stories in it as well. So yeah, technically 1 book, but it was 4 different stories. I believe all of these stories as well are from quite a bit earlier in his career, which it's kind of interesting to see how different, honestly, a lot of these stories are from his later works, or the ones that are like better known. I think 2 of the short stories in here are actually, like, from what I could see, some of the lowest rated of his works on Goodreads, at least. They are, I think, quite different, and I'll be completely honest, weren't really my favorite, but let's break it down a bit. So overall, I think I would probably give this book as an entirety 3 stars. Breaking it down book by book, we have Poor Folk first, which is the longer of the 4, and this is basically a series of letters between this like young woman who I don't really know what she does. She's poor, as the title would suggest, and an older clerk who he's supposedly like distantly related to her, but he very clearly fancies her, and he's also poor. It's basically, yeah, just letters between them to show like the lives of poor people, and yeah, that's it. Poor Folk, I rated 3.5 stars because it did feel a little bit better than 3 stars. I do still sometimes maybe think about it a little bit. I was vaguely interested in what was happening, but I didn't love it. I found the guy, I can't remember either of their names, but I found the guy who was writing letters just really annoying. This collection of short works really made me realize that Dostoevsky was intentionally or unintentionally very good at writing really, really irritating male characters. But anyway, we'll come to that more with the second one. I did find it quite funny that he'd be all like poetic and like, yeah, bordering on slightly romantic, as if he's trying to like feel things out with how she'd respond in his letters, and then the letters she would write back would just be really pissed off at him every single time, and I found it really funny. So that was quite enjoyable. I didn't mind the format of it being in letters. There'd obviously be like spaces of time between these letters. They would reference things that had happened where they'd seen each other, but we didn't get to see those scenes where they like met up or talked outside of the letters, and they would like lightly allude to them, but they wouldn't really give you enough information for you to then know what had happened. So it kind of felt like you were missing out on part of the story, and then because of that, at times things maybe didn't make as much sense, because clearly there were things happening outside of the letter that I didn't feel were particularly explained well enough for us to understand what was happening. Maybe I just wasn't taking it in properly. I did read most of this book on a rail replacement bus service, so maybe that just wasn't the best environment for me to be reading it in, but it did just feel like we were missing certain parts. I also just every so often just kept thinking, and I don't think this would be anyone else's problem but mine. They say quite often that they literally live across from each other in like a square of apartments. Like his first letter is talking about how he can see the light in her window, and her turning it on and off in certain ways is clearly a message for him. Anyway, just every so often I'd be like, why are you writing so many letters to each other? You could literally just pop over, or you probably bump into each other quite a lot. Why are you getting someone to carry letters over when you literally like right across the road from each other? Every so often I'd be like, this just seems a bit silly. I don't know how things were back then, obviously, like maybe that was quite normal, but yeah, just that kind of took me out of things every so often. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, it was just okay. Then the next, this is the shorter stories now. We have The Landlady, which was 3 stars. I honestly think 3 stars may have been generous. I really don't think this was my thing. It's apparently more influenced by like Russian folklore, which obviously I don't know a lot about, so I didn't pick up on any of that because I don't know any of it. Maybe I should, and then maybe it would make more sense to me, because to be completely honest, I have no idea what the fuck happened in this story. So basically the guy, I can't remember his name either, he moves back to St. Petersburg maybe, or he's been there for a while. No, his landlady is selling her house, so he has to find somewhere new to live. He sees this woman and an old man at church, and she like lies down and prays and is crying, and he's like, oh my god, I'm obsessed with this woman, I'm gonna follow her and this man back to their house. Realizes they have a room to let. No, there's no advertisement there. He just starts asking people if there's a room to rent from the lady in the church, and he manages to get a room with them just because he saw her crying in a church, and he's now obsessed with her and like thinks he's in love with her when he's maybe spoken to her like twice. He's also ill all the time. The whole time he's there he's ill and has a fever, to the extent where generally I was so confused by what was happening in this story and why he suddenly was so in love with her and like she was reacting in certain ways, that I genuinely at one point thought he was about to wake up from his fever and realize everything that had happened thus far in the story was like some weird fever dream. I wouldn't have even been surprised if that was what happened. It wasn't. I was just very confused. This wasn't my favorite. This wasn't for me. I was confused. I didn't really get it. I found the main character so unbelievably annoying. He was so irritating. I didn't necessarily hate this, and maybe if I reread this I might be able to take in more of it or like see it differently, but it just really wasn't my favorite. All right, and then the next one, I'm really sorry if I pronounced this really badly wrong. Mr. Prokarchin, is that how you say that? That one. This I rated 3 stars, but thinking back on it, I think actually maybe I might have enjoyed this more than I thought. At the time, I was just like, what is the point of this story? But now looking back on it, I think it's quite funny. Basically, a seemingly miserable, poor, isolated man who lives in like an apartment that has loads of different people living in it, he dies. Obviously that's not all that happens. It's like he had like a surprising secret that people find out when he dies. When I finished this, I was just like, what was the point in that? Genuinely, what was the point in that? I don't think I was in the right headspace to be reading it, potentially, because I thought back on it when I was like reviewing what I'd read this month, and I was like actually reflecting on it, what they found out was just quite funny. So I don't know if it was meant to be funny, but I thought it was. I can't really tell you much more than that, honestly, because not a lot happens. It's basically just showing this guy being quite miserable and not really getting on with people, and, you know, having to eat barely anything because he's so poor. And if I can't tell you more than that because then it like ruins it. Still not one of my favorites, but it was like not as bad as I thought initially, I think is what I'm trying to say. And then the last one, again, I'm really sorry for my pronunciation. Pulzunkov, is that how you say that? This was a 3.5 stars. Basically, our main character is not really the main character. He goes to a bar and there's this guy there and he is telling the story of the time he nearly got married, and this guy is like described as he makes everyone laugh because he doesn't want anyone to actually laugh at him, so he like uses humor as a defense mechanism when clearly he's probably actually a little bit damaged and upset. And so yeah, he's telling everyone the story of how he nearly got married. Then that's the whole story, is just his story. You know, the story was okay. It was enjoyable. Why I rated this higher was because I just enjoyed the character. I enjoyed him, and I wish we'd had more of that character in a different, longer story. You know he didn't get married, but still like finding out what happened and why, you're just like, oh, Oh, that's depressing for you, but also a little bit funny because it's like unexpected depressing, I suppose, where it's like really sudden. It was one of those which I do appreciate, and yeah, I like the character. That is Poor Folk and Other Stories. I don't really know that I would recommend it, honestly. I think I've realised I much prefer Dostoevsky's long, fat books. The thing I appreciate so much about his writing is more like the immersion in the environment you're in and the world he's painting, because I don't think you really get that in the shorter stories, but also the more like digging deeper into the characters. Maybe that's just something I need to remember. If you like the shorter stuff, then you'll probably enjoy this. I just don't think, for me personally, it was my favourite. That is it for classics. We are now moving into fantasy. I can't actually remember what this series is actually called, this duology, but One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig. I appreciate this duology has been everywhere for ages, and I have never heard a single bad thing about this duology, including from people whose recommendations I genuinely trust. So I knew I was probably gonna like it. However, I just kind of put off reading. I just hadn't felt like I was in the mood for it for ages, and I basically only read it because I cancelled my Kindle Unlimited and I had the first book on Kindle Unlimited and I needed to read it by the time my subscription was going to expire. So I was like, fuck it, I'll just read it now. And oh my god, it was so good. In case you are unaware, because honestly I'd heard this book anywhere, but I had no idea what it was about. I'd kind of forgotten it was even fantasy until I started reading it. We are transported to the mystical world of Blunder, I think it's called. And in Blunder, magic is seen as like quite dangerous. It's like very earthy spirit magic that's like travels on the mist that is surrounding the town, and the mist is getting worse and it's infecting more people with magic. It usually affects children, so if children are found to have the infection, then they're usually taken and taken out because the magic is dangerous and they need to protect, the royalty need to protect everyone else in the kingdom by making sure that kind of magic isn't like just let to free roam. There is a safe way to use magic, which is the use of these things called providence cards, and these were created ages ago, and basically there's a bunch of different ones and they'll do different things. They're kind of like tarot cards. There's multiple copies of most of them, but some of them are more rare than others depending on the kind of magic they give. Basically our main character, Elspeth, she has some kind of demon spirit something living in her head. This is like magic, right? So she can't tell anyone this. She's an adult now, but this has been the case since she was a child, and she's just trying to keep this secret and survive so that no one finds out and she doesn't get taken by the, I was about to say the Inquisition. She doesn't get taken by the royals to be taken out. So she's always been like quite reclusive, but then like as the book progresses, she's getting pushed more into being around other people and maybe certain royals, and she's trying to keep this secret so that she doesn't die. Both of these books, because I read both of them back to back immediately, both of them 5 stars. This was such enjoyable fantasy. It does have romance in it, but I wouldn't call it romantasy. The romance was fine, it was palatable, but I still think the like main plot took the forefront, and the magic was just very interesting. The characters were very interesting. Anything that involves any kind of tarot cards I instantly love, so that system of being like how the magic was controlled and worked was great. I really enjoyed that. And like as the books go on, finding more about the different providence cards and what they do, how they were created, and like what happens to people who use them was really interesting, and I think done really well. The like atmospheric setting and the way that was written, I think was really immersive. And now still, if I'm just like out and it's like misty in a morning, I'm like, oh shit, the magic's here. It's like fully like associated that mist and magic with me. You really feel like you're there, to the extent where like I was just instantly hooked. I was instantly in this and just really wanting to know what was gonna happen, like wanting to keep reading, which honestly, even though there's another book that I'm gonna say the exact same thing about, doesn't actually happen to me very often. But I don't think it was just like the world and the magic either. I did really enjoy the characters too. Our female main character, Elspeth, wasn't too YN. I mean, she wasn't too YN. She was fine. She was, I suppose, maybe a bit of a standard fantasy female main character. And you could argue maybe, I don't even remember what his name is, it was probably like Kai or something. His name wasn't Kai. I don't remember what his name was. The male love interest. You could argue he was kind of a standard male love interest too, but it's still, I think the main thing is this didn't feel like just copy and paste. I've already read this story 20 different times before. It did feel different. There were unique elements to it. The characters were genuinely enjoyable and I wanted to know more about them. In the second book, Two Twisted Crowns, we get more points of view from different characters that we've like met in the first book, and that I thoroughly enjoyed. I actually preferred the points of view of, I think, two of the like newer characters in the second book to the like original first two characters that we got. I found learning more about them interesting. We got to see different parts of the world and like society, and it was wonderful. It was really good. I know multiple different points of view sometimes doesn't work very well, but I think it did in this sense. There wasn't times where I was like, oh, I don't want to switch, or I don't want to read this person's point of view. I never felt like that. I was interested regardless on whose point of view I was with. It didn't feel like it was slowing the story down too much. It just felt like it was like giving more and explaining more of the different things going on in a good way. All in all, I have not a bad thing to say about this book. Honestly, I've really enjoyed both of them. Genuinely worth all of the good things that people say about it. Yeah, I just really recommend. Okay, the next book you could argue is not technically fantasy. It's more like horror, but I'm gonna leave it in the fantasy category because it feels more fantasy to me than it feels horror. This is What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher. This is the second book in the Sworn Soldier series, I think it's called. I would say you could read this as a standalone though. There are some things mentioned that like obviously happen in the first book, but you don't need to know what happened in the first book to be able to understand what's happening in this book, the second book. We follow the same main character as we did in What Moves the Dead. Alix is like a ex-soldier, goes back to their like family hunting lodge that they haven't been to for ages because their friend Miss Potter who's like a mushroom studier. Is it a mycologist? Have I made that up? She studies mushrooms anyway, and she wants to come and study the mushrooms in that area around Alix's family hunting lodge. So Alix goes back to like make sure it's ready for Miss Potter to come stay in, and when they get there they find the caretaker is dead, and when they go into like the local village to ask about what's going on or what's happened and to ask for help to sort out the house because they don't have a caretaker anymore, everyone in the village is like weirdly distrustful, weird, evasive, and they're like, maybe something's going on here. And then like just the atmosphere of the house feels off. Things are spooky. Things feel weirdly like deathly silent and odd. And then yeah, spooky things happen. This I rated 3.5. I think I could be convinced to put it up to a 4 because here's the thing, right? I did really enjoy this. I love T. Kingfisher. I really do. I haven't read that many of her books, but every single one I've read, I really enjoy. Like the characters, the atmosphere, the vibes, the plot, all of it. I really enjoy it. Here's my only complaint with this book, which is probably an unfair complaint, and that is that I wish it had been longer. I think everything was wrapped up okay. I think things were like, you know, covered fine. It wasn't like things felt rushed or missed or anything by it being a shorter book, but I just think the atmosphere of the house and the actual like things that were happening could have been done. When I say like better, if it had been longer, I don't mean this is bad. I just think you could have got such a good spooky atmosphere and like kind of mystery and intrigue behind what's going on if this was a bit longer, because while I said it didn't feel rushed, I do think the actual conclusion and resolution of the things that were happening did feel a bit too convenient and too easy and too quick. I think again, if it had been longer and these things were building up over time and they're trying to work out what was going on, I think it wouldn't have felt like that. But it was still enjoyable. And if you're looking for things that are like kind of creepy, scary, but not actually scary, because maybe like me, you're a wimp and can't handle scary things, I would really recommend at least the Sworn Soldier books anyway. They have like an edge of the creepiness, a little bit weird, a little bit that mystery of what's going on, but they're not actually scary. I was never scared at any point, and I am a wimp. I don't watch horror films. I can't do it. I'm too scared. I will be terrified of everything for like a month straight if I watch a horror. These books feel like comfortable. They're like just a little bit spooky, but not to like you're actually scared. I do really enjoy them. I would really recommend them. I do just wish this one had been a little bit longer. Next we have A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. Before I get into how I felt about this book, A Dowry of Blood is basically a retelling of Dracula's wives. It's never explicitly said that the vampire in this is Dracula. It's told from like letters or a story that our main character Constanta writes to the unnamed vampire who turned her. Basically accounts her life from dying after what was like, I think like a village attack in her like poorer village in Romania, and then being found by this unnamed vampire who we assume is Dracula turned, and then like the centuries of her life afterwards with other people being turned and brought into the family, and then the eventual conclusion of her killing him, which is not a spoiler by the way. It's literally made explicit that she does that on the first page of the book. But anyway, sounds like it would be interesting, right? It sounds like it would be something that I personally would love, because I love Dracula, I love vampires, I like gothic novels. I was so fucking disappointed by this book, honestly. So I've got it down as 3.5 stars, and genuinely I think I was only rating it that to be kind. I don't actually think I liked it enough to be able to rate it that. It is going to be difficult for me to put into words why I didn't like this book. Just something about it felt off, something about it felt missing and almost quite shallow, but I can't exactly pinpoint what it is or what was missing or what would have made it better. I think the writing at times was really, really nice, but I also think that at times felt like there was too much of a focus on the writing and how it sounded rather than the actual plot or emotion or motives of the characters. The characters, I didn't really care about any of them. Constanta was interesting at times, but again, it felt like she was a little bit flat. It felt like there was things missing, and that she wasn't fully developed as a character. She didn't really have a distinct personality, and you could argue that's because she was turned. She'd been turned for a very long time, and Dracula had, you know, got her personality out of her and like dehumanized her a little bit. I don't think it was that. I don't think it was that. It felt like she was just a bland main character. Then there's also Magdalena, who also gets turned. She was okay. She had more personality than Constanta, but again, it was kind of like it almost got forgotten about at times. Then we've got Alexei, the other one who gets turned, and he was the only character to me that felt like an actual distinct character. He actually felt like he had personality, and he actually felt like a person rather than just words on a page, you know? Even Dracula didn't really feel like a character. I think this is another criticism I have, is that Dracula wasn't fucking in it. And I know it's not supposed to be about him, it's about the brides, but the whole point of it is that it's showing how he was controlling, manipulative, emotionally abusive, all of that towards them, and then working through that and then breaking free of that. That's the point of the book, right? But he's not present. Dracula's not present in actual Dracula. So could it be like, you know, a similarity to that? And here's the difference I have, right? In Dracula, he is not really physically present very often, but you always feel him as this like off-page menacing presence that's just like lingering over all of the characters. You don't feel that in this book, and I think if you did, the point of it would come across better. But I personally didn't feel that. I don't think it demonstrated very well the control and power that he had over them, because he just wasn't there, and it wasn't written in a way that made it feel like his presence was there even when he wasn't, in my opinion. Anyway, I just didn't enjoy this very much. I honestly found it a bit boring. I appreciate that the life of a vampire is probably quite boring, because you are just alive for centuries and trying to find things to do to fill your time, but it did literally just feel like they were doing the same things over and over again, but just in slightly different settings or slightly different environments. It was also really difficult to work out like how much time had actually passed throughout all of this, and I don't know if that was deliberate or not, but it would be like, we're talking about one thing and you'd think you had a vague idea of where they were in time, and then suddenly they'd mention something and you'd be like, oh, we're actually, I don't know, 100 years prior to where I thought we were, or we're 200 years plus where I thought we were. Not really the most important thing to the story, honestly, but it was just, it just made it more confusing, and again, just took you out of it again, because then you were like, oh, what's happening? I thought we were here. I am really disappointed because I thought I was going to really enjoy this. If you've read it, I would be interested to know what you think. And, you know, have I just missed something? You know, are there things you liked about it that I missed? Or did you feel the same? Because this was a book I was really, really looking forward to, and was surprised and disappointed that I didn't enjoy it as much as I did. And then the final in fantasy is Starling House by Alix E. Harrow. This book, oh my god, okay, this is another book that I have heard nothing but good things about, including from people that I trust, and just put off reading because I either wasn't in the mood or I was like worried that I wasn't actually gonna like it, so I just didn't read it. I'm so glad that I read this. So in Starling House, we follow Opal, who in advance, I'm really sorry if I accidentally call her Lex at any point. If you're a Star Kid fan, Opal reminds me of Lex from Black Friday. If that means anything to you, that's what her character's like. But anyway, we follow Opal and kind of her younger teenage brother, Jasper. They live in just a motel room after their mum died in a car crash. This leaves Opal in charge of providing for Jasper, and she does this through like working but also stealing and various things like that. She's basically very scrappy, survival, kind of does whatever to make sure Jasper gets what he needs and the life she thinks he deserves. She kind of puts him before everything and never really focuses on things for herself. Since Opal was young, she's had dreams about Starling House, which is like this big house on the outskirts of the town she lives in that like everyone, all the locals agree is bad news. Something bad's happening in there. They don't trust the people who live there, the Starling family, who just seem to come along every so often. Every time one dies, like someone else will come along. They don't trust them, they don't like the house, but Opal's like really intrigued by it. And then one day she accidentally finds herself at the house and she gets offered a job to be the cleaner or like housekeeper, and of course she takes it. Gets paid way more than her previous job, and she's been dreaming about this house for ages. She's really intrigued by it. The story progresses, her working there and all of that. She finds out more and more about the house, the history, the people who lived there and what happened to them, and she kind of like quickly then gets like sucked into this world and all of these things going on, and yeah, just more than she thought she would. This genuinely I could not put down. This is 5-star easily. I loved this book. I, more so than One Dark Window, genuinely could not put this down. I was annoyed every night when I had to stop reading to go to bed. I was annoyed when my lunch break finished and I had to stop reading it. I just wanted to read all of this and not stop. Invested immediately, loved the atmosphere, loved the house so much, loved the characters. Opal, maybe one of my favorite female main characters that I've read in a long time. She is not YN in the slightest. She has such an interesting and different personality to a lot of characters in fantasy. We also have at some points the point of view of Arthur, who is the current owner of Starling House. He was okay. There were moments where I was like, oh my god, this is adorable. He's actually like really sweet. And there were other times where it was just like quite funny, and seeing more of him was interesting, but honestly I would have liked to explore his character further, as in like see more of his backstory, get more of his beliefs and thoughts and the psychology behind him like we did with Opal. He was interesting, but we didn't get as much of him as we did Opal, obviously. Her brother, fantastic character as well. The relationships between all the different characters, wonderful. I think written very, very well. The sibling relationship was wonderful. The relationships that Opal has with like the few other people in her life that she's reluctant to like trust or rely on because she's been forced to be so independent, but like the relationships she has with them, wonderful, very interesting, very complex, dynamic, loved it. The relationship between her and Arthur, fine, okay. Here's the thing with this book, right? Like I was gonna say the romance didn't take like center stage over the plot, and it didn't. The whole book wasn't about the romance, it was just kind of there in a way that I think complemented and weaved into everything else, the character's development and the plot and all of that perfectly. It was developed in a way that was interesting and also complemented things rather than just became the main point of the story, which is what I like. The actual plot itself and like us kind of discovering things alongside Opal, like the story of the house and what's really going on, really interesting, like, and I think paced quite well as well. It just felt like quite a good speed and natural progression. The house itself, like I said, the atmosphere of it, amazing. One of my favorite things in Gothic literature is the idea of like buildings or houses like almost having a character and personality of their own, and it is like next level in this. It is strong, it is amazing, and that element of it and that environment of the house was wonderful. I really appreciated and enjoyed that and think it was done very, very well. I don't have a single bad thing to say about this book. I loved every part of it. I'm not even joking when I say I cried when I finished it just because I didn't want it to be over. The ending isn't even sad, I just didn't want the book to be over. It was so good, and I would recommend this book to everyone. And now we have my two little MISC editions that don't really fit into either of those categories. Firstly, we have Lemon by Kwon Yeo-Sun. Really sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. I really don't remember this book very well at all. This is a really short book. It's like 100 and something pages, and this was another one that I read just because I had it on Kindle Unlimited and my subscription was running out and I didn't want to like lose it, so I read it like before the subscription ran out, and that was like really early in the month, so I really don't remember very much about it. It's basically, it focuses on the different experiences of grief and loss, and it basically follows the death or murder of a girl at high school and like the experiences and reactions of her sister afterwards, but also like various other people that would have been at school with them or like friends with them or maybe suspected to be involved with what happened. I rated this 3 stars. Basically, it's told from the perspectives of quite a few different people, and I think at different points in time, like either around the time of the death or afterwards as well. It was incredibly difficult and incredibly confusing to work out who was narrating that chapter. I think there was like 3 main people, like voices that we heard, and they were, one of them was really obvious who it was because all of their chapters were told via one-sided phone conversations, so you could work out that one immediately who that was, but you're never actually told who that person is. You can kind of work it out, but you also do just have to guess and work out for yourself who that person is based on prior information you have about the rest of the story and people involved. Then the 2 other voices were so similar. There was no indication of who each chapter was like voiced by. It was quite confusing at times, honestly, to work out whose point of view you were reading and when in time this was happening as well. Maybe kind of made it more difficult to follow and read and like fully get into the experience too. There was some interesting looks there at the different ways that grief can affect different people, but I don't think it covered it in the way I was expecting it to. Yeah, it just didn't, things didn't really stay with me. Obviously I can't really remember most of it, but it is a very quick read, to be fair, so it might be that I just kind of rushed through it a little bit. You know, there were some really positive reviews of it, so maybe it just wasn't my thing, or maybe it wasn't the right time for me to read it. It's not necessarily something I'm going to think about again, you know. It wasn't the worst thing, but it wasn't like a favorite either. Sorry that I can't leave a better review of that, because honestly yeah, my memory is just shit. And then the last thing, something quite different. Captain America Golden Age, what is it? The Golden Age Years Volume 1. I, at some point in the month, just needed something that wasn't going to require too much of my concentration, that I could kind of just dip in and out of, basically. There was like some evenings where I wanted to read, but I was like maybe in between books and didn't necessarily want to get stuck into something right then. In case you don't know, I love Captain America. He is one of my favorite characters of anything ever. The 3 first Captain America films, the newest one isn't out yet, is it? I don't think it's out yet. I will go see that when that's out, but specifically I'm talking about Steve Rogers, Captain America. Those 3 films are just some of my favorite films of all time, but specifically the first Avenger is like my main comfort film. I've lost count of how many times I've watched it. I love it so much. I don't really know why I thought about reading comics. I don't know, I thought comics weren't my thing, so I was like, well, I love Captain America. I want something easy to read that, you know, I can just kind of pick up and put down quite easily. Maybe I should get into this. And honestly, after the minefield of trying to work out where to start with Captain America comics, I just decided to start chronologically in terms of when they were published. So, but these are like the original 1940s comics. I don't really know how to put a rating on this in comparison to books. Like, it feels a bit weird or different to put a rating on this. I don't know that I'd say they're good, but they are highly entertaining. Obviously they are very of their time. I think you can look at the beginnings of Steve Rogers as a character and see that very much he was used as pro-America patriotism during the war. Obviously that's in the comics, especially because it was published around the time of the war, so they want that like patriotism and like everyone rallying together. But in general, these are the cheesiest, most ridiculous things ever, and they are genuinely quite funny. Probably unintentionally so, but reading them now, they are hilarious. The funniest thing to me, I don't know at what point in the films in what point in the comics this changes, or how Bucky ends up being the Winter Soldier, but in these original comics, Bucky's like, he's like a 12-year-old child. Steve is an adult in the army. Bucky is like a 12-year-old child who's also in the army for some reason. I don't really know why he's in the army. Like, what value does a 12-year-old child serve to you? And he's just Steve's sidekick. And the way he ends up being Steve's sidekick is he accidentally sees Steve in the Captain America suit one day, and Steve's just like, oh, you know who I am now, so I guess you're my sidekick, and that's it. And then he's just taking this 12-year-old with him to it's absolutely ridiculous and silly, and I can't necessarily say it's good, but it's comforting characters that I enjoy, and it's very easy to read and just pick up and put down when I want something that isn't like, you know, an actual book. Yeah, I don't really know how to give a rating. Might just go in the middle of 3 stars. I will read more of them. If there are any like Marvel comic fans here, I specifically, maybe I will go into other comics as well, but specifically I just want to read at the moment the Captain America comics. I know there are hundreds of them, and trying to find like a recommended reading order for them is actually quite confusing. If you have any advice or wisdom in terms of Marvel comics, please let me know. That is everything I've read this month though. I feel like I've been talking for hours. I have been talking for hours, Jesus. I feel like there was a lot to talk about this month. This has been like, I think, the most I've read in quite a while. I had a lot of thoughts to get out about it apparently. So it's been a good month though. Yeah, I found some new favourites, which is always very exciting. Some flops and disappointments, but you know, whatever, that's gonna happen. Again, I would love to know what you've been reading recently and what you've been enjoying or what you haven't. If you have read any of these books and, you know, want to share your thoughts on them, again, always welcome that. Just be nice to each other, please, if you are doing that. But that is all I have for you today. So I hope wherever you are having a wonderful day, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.